Bonjour and hello, I'm James, and I'll be your host for this season of the Everyday Forum podcast, an original Stratfest at Home podcast showcasing a sampling of the thought-provoking discussions from the Stratford Festival's 2024 Meighen Forum. The Stratford Festival's Meighen Forum is a festival within the festival, designed to enhance and contextualize the performances in the main Stratford Festival season through compelling discussions, small-scale, exciting performances, and engaging multi-sensory events and workshops. Enjoy!
Good morning. It's so great to see everybody out this morning. My name is Julie Miles, and I'm the Meighen Forum Director, and I would like to welcome you to our first event, which is part of our Global Theatre Week here at the Meighen Forum. Shakespeare understood people, relationships, and community. His uncanny ability to weave together these necessities for our existence is often found rooted in nature. The Forest of Arden, Burnham Wood, the magical fairyland home of Oberon and Titania, and goodness knows how many times characters have been banished or sent away to only find themselves lost and then found again in the woods. The universality of our human need to connect with nature was just as true in Shakespeare's time as it is today. And here on Turtle Island, where we gather here today, we need to give thanks to the ancestral guardians of this land and its waterways, the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Wendat, and the Attawandaronk. Today, many Indigenous peoples continue to call this land home and act as its stewards, and this responsibility extends to all of us to take action and continue learning about and caring for this land for generations to come. So it is a privilege to introduce our panel to you today. Rodrigo Beilfuss, born and raised in Brazil, he first moved to Manitoba in 2001 as an exchange student and ended up staying for love and for Shakespeare. In Winnipeg, Rodrigo has directed and acted in theatre, film, and TV. He is a graduate of Stratford's Birmingham Conservatory and the Michael Langham Workshop in Directing. Rodrigo spent 4 years with the Stratford Festival and then relocated back to Winnipeg to be artistic director of Shakespeare in the Ruins. He has also been an educator across Canada, the USA, UK, and in his native Brazil, and taught Shakespeare and Chekhov at the National Theatre School. Yeah, he needs a role. Yeah. PJ Prudat is a storyteller, actor, poet, arts educator, and playwright, and she holds a creative residency with Night Swimming and the Theatre Centre. She's also co-artistic director at Shakespeare in the Ruff, and she is also connected to Shakespeare in the Ruins. We'll get to that story in a little bit, but just hold that, put that in your brain. She's among the first ever Indigenous women to hold space as a company actor at both the National Arts Centre and the Shaw Festival. She is co-curator and advocate for the Young Ruffian Artist Program at Shakespeare in the Ruff and is pursuing an MFA in creative writing at UBC. PJ is a daughter of the fur trade. Her matrilineal ancestors traveled by dog team, were buffalo hunters, Métis resistance, and Treaty 6 hereditary chief signatories, and their stories light the way. Welcome, PJ. Our moderator today, I have 2 pages. It is a privilege to introduce our moderator today, an accomplished playwright and actor. This year marks her 8th season at the Stratford Festival. She's originally from Montreal. She was part of the Stratford Festival's Birmingham Conservatory and graduated from McGill University and Dawson College. She teaches Chekhov and Shakespeare at the National Theatre School. In fact, I believe that I stage managed one of her first shows here at the festival, which was The Alchemist, and I knew from that moment that she was destined for greatness on the stage. This season, you can see her as Lady Capulet in Romeo and Juliet and Viola in Twelfth Night. It is in my honest opinion that her genuine spirit, her incredible talent, and her quest for excellence in all that she does makes her a true superstar of the theater. In fact, I wrote this last night. It was very late. But shall I compare thee to Taylor Swift? Because that's what I think. Please join me in welcoming our moderator today, Jessica Hill.
Hi, wow, okay. It's a privilege to have both of you here. And I find this is my favorite topic, so I can't wait for us to just dive in. I think it's best to just start with all three of us aren't Anglo-Saxon, and Shakespeare is a huge part of our lives. In fact, one of us has a tattoo of a Shakespeare verse on his arm. So how about we please just say what brought you to him? What is it about his work? Why Shakespeare?
You
I start. You start. I start. Wow. Okay. Well, I think thanks for coming, guys. And thanks for this. It's interesting, and a good way to start, I think, because you're going personal, and I think the best way to talk about Shakespeare and the world, which is such a huge topic, and none of us can talk about the world. But I think that, paradoxically, the more personal you are in theater, in dramatic storytelling, the more it resonates universally. It's one of those wonderful things about the form. So I think that's a nice way to start. Yeah, a personal sort of way in. Two things. The way I kind of first saw Shakespeare represented it, I think the very first thing I saw was through movies, but not movies of Shakespeare. I grew up in Brazil. I remember watching Dead Poets Society. And there's a wonderful scene when he gets a part as Puck in Midsummer Night's Dream. And he's just so happy about being in it, and he's so thrilled about the community and then making the families, the casts become. And I remember thinking, wow, this looks fun and full of joy, and it's Shakespeare. And then I saw a movie. I always talk about this. Forgive me if some of you have heard it. It's ridiculous, but it's true. When I saw the movie Highlander 2, which is a horrible movie, but there's a sequence in the movie. It's set in the future. And the world is crumbled. It's just ruins. And there's no sunlight anymore because the ozone layer is gone. And then there's a scene in the movie. It's a staging of Hamlet. And Sean Connery is beamed from the sky, from the beyond. And he's materialized on stage during a staging of Hamlet in this post-apocalyptic world. And I remember as a child going, wow, the world is gone. It's just ruins, and there's trash everywhere, and they're still doing Hamlet. Like, it must be important, was the thought I had in my head. So that was kind of mystifying. I was watching, a Shakespearean representation in a sci-fi movie from America starring a French actor playing a Scotsman and a Scotsman playing a Spaniard, and I was watching with Portuguese subtitles in Brazil. So you have these layers or these filters of cultures and translations going through, and it's still, for me, the thing that kind of caught me was like the Shakespeare thing, the skull and the guy wearing black, and what is this? And then I found myself moving to Canada when I was 18. And Hamlet showed up again as an exchange student in class, and I was terrified because I was like, I'm not going to understand any of it. I barely speak English. It was a very rustic, approach I had to the language at the time. I barely spoke it. So then I thought I was going to fail the class. But I had a wonderful teacher, Mr. McLeod, who changed everything for me. And sometimes it takes a wonderful teacher to kind of open things up for you. But the thing that kind of unlocked it for me was the realization that everybody in the class was like, I don't get this either because it's Shakespearean English. So then I was like, oh, great, we're all lost and confused and scared together. So for me, to actually answer the question it was a touchstone of an invitation to be part of a culture that was alien to me, and I was coming into fresh off the boat, and the very language that was terrifying me was the thing that was unifying us. We were all democratically lost, going, what is quintessence of dust? What is, this or that? What is, fardals? What is that? So all of us were so confused, and I found that electrifying, that I wanted to crack the code and go like, I know what this means. So for me, it was an invitation to belong in a new country, a new culture that was terrifying for everybody.
Wow, thank you so much in that. I'm trying to rack my brain for the moments. I remember being probably 8 or 9 and watching some sort of sitcom. I don't even know what it was. Maybe something with Archie Bunker, I feel. And my mom, there was a moment when somebody said, like Romeo and Juliet. there was a response that happened, a reaction to that phrase, and I had never heard that before. So I had asked my mom, I said, well, who are they? And she said, oh, well, this is the story of them. And I was like, oh, like just like, this child that I never had heard of them prior to this moment, but I still very clearly remember that it was a known storyline, that somehow it had such an impact that it has lasted this long. And I remember in university, in one of my earlier years, that there was another actor that said, I'm so tired of doing Shakespeare. The stories aren't relevant. We have no reason to keep doing it. And there was a frustration with that. And I remember having such a strong reaction to that. I thought, well, stories, like how do we not find a way in? As artists, as human beings, we find the humanity in something and we respond. We have a connection. And so I also had a really wonderful teacher. So I bang your microphone. I had a wonderful teacher, Raymond Montalbetti in Saskatchewan, who he would just get us to create and play and try stuff. And so he had introduced me to 12th Night. And it was just very eye-opening just to experience something from within and just play and not worry about, am I sounding like a Shakespearean actor, or not having the concerns of imposing anything that was really foreign, because I didn't know the first thing about even being an actor. I was terribly shy and nervous, and but the words and the language were the way through. So for me, the poetry of these texts are really what the imagery and the way that we describe an argument. That was something that really impacted me from certain teachers that would just say, oh, well, this is how you're laying this out, and then this, and then this, and then this. And so it really clears, even if some of the language isn't fully understood as you're speaking it at the beginning, you find a way in. There's something that's really accessible somehow or other through the language in the poetry for me. So that was a real touchstone, is the word you used earlier. And I feel like English is not... it's actually not an ancestral language for me. So I do wonder about that, but I think that poetry is also, universal. So we understand through imagery and through heartbeat and through, the rhythms and the connection, the way that we can speak and listen to one another. So that for me is part of the reason that I think I'm here. But also some of these stories are just so amazing that we have to keep telling them and find a way to keep making them relevant, and they are exciting, so yeah.
That's fantastic, both of you. There's something to that, like the stories are almost archetypes. They're almost mythic at this point, right? Like we're talking 400 years. And even then, Shakespeare was adapting stories that had existed before. And what's that? I'm trying to think the quote about myth. Like myth is a story that's never happened, but is always happening. And there's something to like you resonating with the story of Romeo and Juliet. Like that's just such a powerful myth. So maybe we can start talking about adaptation and translation, because how Shakespeare gets to the world is through translation, not there's very few people that speak English across the world. If I just leave it open like that, like, is there anything you'd like to say about translation specifically? Like, you did a whole talk on this at UBC that I just thought was so fascinating about, that's it, like how you have come to Shakespeare through translation and how translation can illuminate the script in a different way or a new way. I like the word illuminate. That's interesting. But also what you're saying, PJ, about there's something that in the language that holds, and I find no difference directing or teaching Shakespeare in Portuguese than when I do it in English. I really find no difference. Of course, it's entirely different, but I find and feel no difference. There's something about the language and this. It sounds so ridiculous, but it's true. There's something about the soul and the gesture behind the plays and behind the stories and behind the man that resonates and carries forth through language and through time. Shakespeare arrived in Brazil in Portuguese translations from French translations of English translations.
Because if you've been to Rio before, you can see Rio is heavily influenced by architecture from Paris. In the time of the Second Empire in Brazil, Paris was the center of culture in the world. So the new colonial power from Portugal that moved the court to Brazil wanted to recreate a sense of sophistication and Parisian flair. So architecture and literature came to Brazil from France, and Shakespeare came to Brazil from France. So then you have these incredibly ornate literary, complex, very heavily poetic translations of the plays from French to Portuguese. And it was not meant to be performed or anything of the sort. It was meant to cause awe and reverence. And look how big and intellectual and powerful this is. And only in the past 20 years or so, Shakespeare's arriving in Brazil now through translations for performance. So Shakespeare is a really fresh, contemporary, radical, flexible, expensive, contemporary playwright in Brazil. He's not this fixed thing that we sometimes try and make of him. And I think he would be appalled to think of himself as a fixed thing. Because, as you say, he was a wonderful stealer. He was a shameless borrower, stealer, adapter. He survives because he's so flexible, and his plays exist in a multiplicity of versions. In his lifetime, Hamlet was, going around in very different versions. He still survives in different, primarily 3 different texts that don't agree with each other. Romeo and Juliet was so pirated during his lifetime and published in, unofficial quartos and such. He was, in his lifetime, his plays were mangled and adapted and cut and copied and pasted in different ways. He didn't care. I'm sure his actors had input on what should stay in, what should stay out. I'm sure Burbage had many strong opinions about, as the leading actor. It's just, he was not precious about these things. So it's ironic, and my provocation for that and my invitation in that topic is that I think, ironically, we can get closer to what he was intending 4 centuries ago if we put him through the prism of different cultures. Ironically, we're gonna get closer to the man and his original intentions if we take him away from the language he was writing in. For example, Othello. We were talking about Othello before I got here, right? It's such a play that touches on really inflammatory themes, and one of its main themes, even though we tend to, rightfully so for many reasons, we focus a lot on the racial tensions in the script and the racial relationships and that complex world of tension and prejudices and oppression. But there's something also that's very powerful in the play, which is, male fantasy, male paranoia, and lust and infidelity and honor. And those themes are so strong in today's Latin American culture. They're so potent. They're so alive. The fear of being a cuckold is so central to Othello. And it's still part of daily life in Latin America. Jokes about cuckoldry, corno is in Portuguese, or corno in Spanish, cornuto in Italian. What is it in French? To be horned. Cornu, right? And in English is cuckold, not quite the same. And we don't really use that word, we don't talk about it daily. That kind of has fallen away. But jokes about cuckoldry and infidelity and loss of honor is so daily life in Latin America. It's still part of jokes that are hysterical in soap operas. In Mexico and Brazil, it's huge. The idea that one grows horns and becomes a cuckold, becomes a corno, a horned one, if their partner cheats on them, is alive in Brazil. I was waiting for a bus one time at the station in São Paulo to go to the airport, and 3 teenage boys walk behind me, and they're looking at their phone, and then one says about the other one, dude, she's put horns on you 3 times already, and you're still texting her? And he said that, right, in Portuguese. And then my thought was right away, Othello is alive and well in Brazil. in 2018. And we don't talk about that, about growing horns. There's a line in Othello when Desdemona says, like, what ails you, my lord? Why are you so cranky? What's happening? And he says, oh, nothing. I have a pain upon my forehead here. That goes over the head of people in the English-speaking world for most of the time. But what he's saying is, I'm growing horns. I know what you're doing. It's hurting. But people don't often get that line in English. You put that in Portuguese, the whole theater just laughs and reacts, and it's immediate. So that joke, that theme of cuckoldry, male honor, infidelity, fear, paranoia, male fantasy is so in the play, and it's so what Shakespeare was dealing with, and it doesn't really land here anymore in English. You put it in Brazil, it sings like it was written for today. And that's, for me, and translations are, by default, cultural adaptations. The translator can't run away from his or her or their biases. They're stuck in that POV, for better or for worse. So invariably, they will put their cultural POV into this play. And I find that fascinating because it makes it sing for now,
Yeah.
Yeah, wow.
What do you think?
Go for it. Yeah.
Were you gonna ask something?
No, I want to hear what you say first.
It's very interesting to me. I think as you were speaking, I was thinking, oh, is there a comparable? And I'm not sure if we have. I mean, maybe somebody can offer an idea towards that. But I do think that what I'm very aware of, and I had written an adaptation of Othello with a Cree Métis matriarch in the role of Othello, and I titled it "O Teheu, She Has a Heart." I have several different themes that really challenged, I think, a patriarchal view. So for me, the character that represents Iago is a younger brother who has been held down or feels very resentful for not being given enough platform as the man of the family. And so in a lot of the writing that I was looking at, or the relationships that I look at, I mean, I wonder about there's something about it that is showing some form of weakness for this character that is resentment or has been shamed somehow. And I think a way in for me to understand this character of, I called him Hamish, which is another name for James. Iago, the representation of that name, which also actually it is it's a very loaded name. It has a real root that's quite contentious, I think. But the main basis of what this character is for me is someone who does not feel man enough himself. And so I think there's something in that is similar.
That's fascinating. Yeah, you're taking a similar way in, but it's through a different prism, a different perspective, but it's still the thing itself. It's still there pulsating, right?
Yeah, and I think that it also, a lot of the themes too that I was looking at were very homophobic and very just in layers of not understanding Cree protocol or Cree indigenous law. There are the patriarchy has impacted that, and so within the play that I have adapted, I really was exploring those themes of how does that affect a whole community ultimately. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's because Iago does say, right, in his very first monologue, he's like, I fear Cassie with my nightcap too. Like, I fear that everybody's sleeping with my wife. Therefore, I'm going to destroy everybody because I have this weird insecurity. And there's nothing more dangerous and fragile than a male ego. It launches world wars. So, yeah.
Yeah, you were speaking in the green room about the volatility of Shakespearean text when placed in a cultural context where it's still in the zeitgeist of the people that are putting it on. Is there more that you'd like to say about that? Or
yeah, I mean, there are so many different, I think, Shakespearean plays that do touch on these very large themes. But for me, I think a major reason that I was interested in looking at this this play in particular is because it deals with such it deals with bonds and alliances in a way that are very historical to these lands, and I think that there's a real there's still an ongoing feeling of survival and who has more, and I think it's really the drama of it within the play is. It's theater and it is a play and it's fun to do that stuff, but it also does ripple. There are real consequences to jealousy or to envy, and I think with the character of Iago, he is rooted in some major envy, and that kind of ego, or that kind of the way that he works the entire. The room, and he tells everyone what he's going to do, and he still goes ahead and does it, and he knows that he knows what he's making. He knows how he's creating a wild web of, dangerous, potent energy, but he's still going for it. There's still a drive there. So, to me, that's a real thing. We're in a world right now where things are pretty extreme, and so I think the levels of this hunger, it's dangerous. It can go pretty. It can take down a lot. It can take down a whole community, that kind of energy, and so working within that can also be. I feel like you're the alchemy of Shakespeare, if anyone is really into that kind of thing, you can make a real storm of text and language and drama on stage, but it also, these are big energies that we all are playing with, and as actors and as artists, I think we also have to be really careful about how we're navigating that, because it can be big. It can really impact, I think, a room and then a larger impact. So for me, I think there's a real necessity of having to make sure that there is a director that can helm something with such an energetical vibe,
Right.
That's kind of what I
like the alchemy of Shakespeare. I like that because it is what the whole world works with when they try to put this thing through, different prisms and to find what the alchemy is and what even that means. But it's true though, right? It's true. We want to retain a sense of a gesture that was there in the, I hate the word original, but I have no other better word to say, but I have to say it. It's original text, whatever that is. I just don't know what that is, original. And I think that's really what touches when we talk about Shakespeare in the world is, what is that?
So that was going to be my next question, is that this is fantastic that we're segueing into this, because it's so complex and contradictory how we've inherited a context as well as the thing itself, right?
A brand.
This idea of original is pumpkin pants, but for them it was just modern dress. It was almost like if we did Hamlet with a t-shirt. Do you know? It's so strange that in our heads that's what it should be or could be or what, right? And separating, and as a tool of imperialism versus a bridge between cultures. And yet in Brazil, it wasn't a tool of imperialism, right? It came through French translation, which is completely different.
It was just an example of human greatness.
Yeah.
Whatever that means.
So I'm not quite sure what the question is, but like how I don't even know how to do it, but like how to separate the man and the work from the body of academia and tool of imperialism and idea of what it should be.
I had a thought, then escaped me. But I think for me, I don't like to think about original, but I do like to think about the idea of a first encounter. I think your first encounter with the thing itself is what it is original for you. It's the first way in. And I said this in a conversation when we were meeting before. It was a shock to me when I moved here and I watched Disney movies in English. And I was like, that's not the original thing. Like, I didn't know that Sebastian was Jamaican in Little Mermaid, because I just grew up with those cartoons dubbed. And again, we can get into the adaptation of The Lion King as Hamlet, right? And which is Hamlet. But for me, the original experience of that canon, the Disney canon, was in Portuguese dubbed versions. So for me, then when I watched with my kids the English versions, there was a weird disconnect. So then that touches on senses, on ideas of property and how proprietorial you might feel towards something. And I think English-speaking people, Anglophones, on some level, at various levels, hold this thing as a property of their language. And it's difficult for them to imagine. I say them as if I'm a part of them as well. It's so weird. It's difficult for some people to see it beyond that. So every time we talk about Shakespeare in different culture or through different translations, the first instinct is, oh, that's interesting. You must lose a lot. You know, there's a sense of like, you always view translations and adaptations as a compromise, as an approximation, as the bastard child, as this thing that is, it's sort of like, you know, and that is because I think we have a profound misunderstanding of the art of translation. You know, Jorge Luis Borges was a huge Titanic literary figure, but he also was a great translator, but we don't know of his work as a translator. And he calls translations the invisible art. And it's funny because Borges is the guy that gave you that wonderful quote, right? Which is, I think there's something Italian, something Jewish about Shakespeare. And I think that's why Englishmen admire him so much, because he's so unlike them. And that's Borges, right? And it's like, and he was a great translator. So I think there's a misunderstanding and a sort of like lack of appreciation for the art of the translation, which can be a bridge between cultures and time. It's a conversation through time. I mean, how exciting is that? I have on my arm a tattoo, a quote from Hamlet. "To thy own self be true," the Polonius quote in Portuguese. And I have WS for William Shakespeare and LFP, Lawrence Flores Pereira, the translator. And I have put them on equal ground, WS and LFP, because I really think the translator is speaking for Shakespeare for now, is channeling this weird alchemy that you mentioned and trying to find a way to communicate what this author was trying to do for now. I gotta tell you, workshopping new translations of these plays with the translator / playwright in the room is the most amazing feeling ever. It was the closest thing I felt to having Shakespeare with me in the room. I really felt I was asking Shakespeare, why are you choosing this word? Why are you choosing this thing? It was an electrifying feeling to have Shakespeare in the room through this translator and be able to ask him and go like, but are you sure this is the rhyme you want to work with at this moment? Why are you switching from prose to verse now? What's making you do that? What are the choices you're making here to manage the 4 centuries between him and us? It's fascinating. So I think it's that. I think for me, so the challenging your assumptions of what a first encounter is, challenging the ideas of what original meant, because Shakespeare was not doing original stuff. He was doing it in his way, but he was stealing from Germans, from Italians, from all these Greek myths, and he was making them his own and defying genre and style through content and form. He was not precious, so I think we shouldn't be precious, and I think he would be okay with seeing, a movie of, I think if he was alive in the 90s, he would be working for Hollywood and making films. And if he was alive now, he'd be making streaming shows, because he likes long narrative arcs and a long arc. So he'd be working for Netflix right now. I have no doubt, because he was a visual artist, right? I mean, like, you think about that first line in Henry V, think when we talk of horses that you see them. Like, it's language through this visual stimulation of your brain. He would be working with film, no doubt about it. So I think you'd be delighted and puzzled that he's become, like, there's a city here after his birth city in England. I mean, look at the filters we're working through here, right? A human-made river called the Avon, it's just bonkers. None of it makes sense, and it's wonderful. It's wonderful. But it's all, again, a translation, right? So yeah, originally I defy it. I defy it because it should be something that is personal to you. It's your first encounter with whatever the art form is. Yeah. What do you think about that, PJ? What's your first encounter with something that was like, that's not the real deal? The real deal.
There's an interesting, the form of language, I think the use of language is really interesting. I do have a couple of mentors that say, do not, under any circumstance, take Cree or any other Indigenous language and merge it with Shakespeare, because you're asking for a lot in that. And I'm wondering about that a bit. I did put Cree in my play. And I think I think one of the reasons that is a statement is that for Indigenous peoples on these lands here on Turtle Island, the Shakespearean language came at a time of colonial empire. So there are those who do know their languages really well can adapt Shakespeare in seconds. Because the languages, for example, Lenape, I was speaking with an artist, a playwright, social worker named Jeff DeHunt, and he says he can translate Lenape so fast into Shakespearean text, iambic pentameter. But it's also because that language and those communities were impacted in a massive, massive colonial way. And so right now there are only 13 speakers. And now there are more that are learning, but there were 13 speakers at that time with the entire Lenape language. And so there is something to be said for the colonial impacts of language and place and time. And I do find it interesting. And I think that's why I also wanted to look at Othello, or my own version of what that might be, and switch it on its head. Because there are certain elements to it that I for one, I don't want to end a play with suicide. That is not something that I am drawn to. So I changed that for me, because within so many Indigenous communities across the map, we are dealing with suicide as a major epidemic, and so seeing it in a play is really hard. And I think that it impacts in different ways. And so for an Indigenous person to see that it will resonate in a way that may not be the same for someone who is not Indigenous. So I also wanted to take this play and add something that would be an element of hope, so that the community has something and somewhere to go. I didn't want it to end and that's it. Because it's that's not for me the way that I can imagine storytelling. I know, there are dramas and, there are things that can end in these really final ways, but for me that was not the way to take this piece. And so with language and with poetry and all of these things, the purpose is I guess I have to have a purpose of what am I trying to say? What is my actual reason? And so for me, it was something else in terms of what you're saying with an adaptation.
Yeah. But as we know, for a couple of centuries, King Lear had a happy ending in the English-speaking world, right? They changed the ending of King Lear.
Victorian times, they were changing the
all
ending
the time,
of everything,
right? Yeah. And then it took like the Germans to sort of like rescue the original ending of things, and so it's so weird that a different culture came in and then normalized the apocalyptic ending of Lear again. But so then what you were doing, people were doing that as well, of course, in English. So it's not like the adaptation and the cutting and the changing and the mangling of it and the stretching and then expanding of it. It's done in English as well, right? It's not just different cultures and different translations. The first thing we do when we get a play here at the festival, anywhere of Shakespeare, is, okay, let's cut it. Well, where are you going to put it? How are you going to dress it up, right? I mean, it's always an adaptation, And it's always there's always a way in from the creators. That's, sometimes more specific than other times. But there's always a gesture into these plays. We never just show up on the first day of rehearsal and just read them and go like, I think it could be this. We always come in with like an agenda, right? Which is weird, but also makes sense. But it doesn't escape this idea of changing it and adapting it. It doesn't escape Shakespearean practice ever, anywhere in the world. So I'm not sure what the answer is to that, or what that means.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, I just find it interesting too that, like for me, the moment I realize they're just people speaking, and it's not this kind of something that I'm trying to reach to, it's I really just have to trust me and find myself in it. I think it dovetailed with my writing. So I'd love to ask you about that too. A huge part of me writing what I did is a love letter to Shakespeare, but it's also making it mine as well, so that I can feel like I have my place in it. And I don't know if that was for you too, like taking Othello, and if that's something you're going to keep doing.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I'm inspired by that concept. Definitely, I actually was really interested in also tackling an ancestral historical event for myself. And so, well, one of the connections that we all three have is Shakespeare in the Ruins. In Winnipeg, and my ancestors were resistance fighters, and they battled the HBC in 1816, and just outside of Winnipeg, there was a huge event that happened. And it was also during the same, I set my play in this time because there was a huge volcanic eruption in Indonesia, and it was so powerful. It was apparently a once in an 80,000 year volcanic eruption, and it blacked out the sun for up to 3 years. So people were starving because there were no crops growing. So people were freezing. No food, famine set in, and all across the globe, and no one had any idea what was going on with the sun because there weren't any newspapers. There wasn't a way to communicate to find out fully what had happened. And so, on the plains, in the prairies, there were people vying for their own territories and also for food sources, and the HBC had tried to monopolize the Métis pemmican business, and so there was a battle that happened on Frog Plain in what is now downtown Winnipeg, and this is a real event that happened, and I was really curious to know how that setting that as the premise for the event would for the play, what would happen with that, and so all of the ripple effects of this particular time frame, and people starving, and who's your buddy, who's not your buddy, who's out, they got it out for you, all of these things that like, when there's a real heightened sense of famine on the rise, what do people do, and how does that impact a little community, especially one that's running under a patriarchal lens like a fort. So I was really interested in that experience, and going out from there. But also my Desmond character is based on several different stories that I had come across. But I was also interested in the combined relationship between Indigenous people and African descended people. And there were African fur traders at that time. And so I created a dynamic between my Otaheyu, or Othello, and Desmond, who were lovers. And under no circumstance did I want to have my Otaheyu attack Desmond, so that created a really interesting problem as a playwright. How do I create this dynamic between them? And also historically, I'm really interested in looking at the Indigenous slave trade, which is also linked with the African slave trade. And so I also incorporated those elements into my play set across what we call Canada at this point. So that's kind of the themes of bonds and alliances and who's out to get you and who's not. Yeah. The themes of Othello at the basis.
Yeah. Oh God, that's so fascinating. It's amazing, and that the essence of that holds in a completely different context. These plays, it's like shining a light through a prism. That's my next question, was the fact that we all teach. You were talking about a youth group, and we've taught Shakespeare to theater school students, and Shakespeare's not mandatory in schools anymore. So often these people are coming to classes where they've had little, if no, exposure to this material, and it's changed the way I have approached it. And I've noticed also the classrooms are more diverse than they were when I was coming up. What's it like teaching Shakespeare to younger people? What's the message? How do you get through the bits that are a bit harder to wrestle with?
It's so. Now I have the memory of us going to Sault Marie. Remember that?
You want to talk about
the festival one time sent Jessica and I to Sault Marie to teach Hamlet in 3 or 4 different schools for a couple of days.
To teach the good word of the bard.
To spread the gospel of the bard. And they sent us there, and we flew there in this little plane, and in the middle of winter. And then we got to this school. It was grade 12 class, and we're supposed to teach Hamlet. And then we realized they told us that they had never read any of his plays or seen any of the movies, had no connection or no insight or no introduction to Shakespeare. And then we're supposed to have, in 1 hour, we're supposed to go like, so Hamlet.
Yeah.
And it kind of really stopped me. Kind of like, oh my God, we came in with all these ideas and thoughts, and like, the question is, how do you start? They still knew to be or not to be, which somehow we all know in different cultures, different languages. If you can go anywhere in the world, they go like Shakespeare, they go to be or not to be. In any language, it's the weird thing in our collective, consciousness. I don't know, because I don't know if I would be in theater if it wasn't for Shakespeare and Mr. MacLeod, because the thing is, I find through Shakespeare a liberation, and this is the whole ironic and paradoxical thing of it all, right? I find a liberation and an acceptance and a normalization through Shakespeare that I don't find in other plays. I think it's okay. In Shakespeare, I can be the Prince of Denmark. I can be a Roman general. I can be a Greek soldier. I can be a prince from France. I can be a duke from Burgundy. I can be anything in Shakespeare.
Cleopatra.
Yeah, I was going to say the Queen of Egypt.
You would be the Queen of Egypt, right? At SIR. So it's like you can, and you don't, and now in the time we live in, we're so careful. And we want to make sure that we stay in our lanes and we fit our boxes, and I refuse to be boxed in. I hate it. I just don't want to go and play Brazilian dad in every play, So I rebel against that. But in Shakespeare, I can be the Prince of Denmark. So I find that freeing, right? And so for me, that's sort of like how I kind of go in when I go and teach. I go like, listen, kids, we're here in this high school in Brandon, Manitoba, as I was a couple months ago. Why do you like Shakespeare? Why do you hate Shakespeare? What? And some of them love it. And those that say they don't like it are just terrified. And that's okay. That's a normal response to have to it, because they've been told through time somehow that it's important and religious in a way. But then I try and tell them, like, listen, I didn't speak English and I went to Stratford. I think you'll be okay. Like you can do this. If I could do this, you can do this. I think it's trying to help them find a way to be okay with not understanding. We live in a time where complexity is suspicious. We live in a time that if anything is too difficult, it must not be true, or if it's too complex and too difficult, it's being used to hide a truth that you're not part of, and they're trying to fool you. So we want fast, quick explanations for everything. If you cannot explain something in the time of an elevator pitch, it's not worthy of value. The great thing about Shakespeare is that he is complex. you cannot program a season of theater based on that. Nobody's going to come and say, come see a season of complex plays. Doesn't sound marketing-wise, doesn't sound very appealing, but that's the truth. He's difficult, he's complex, he's working with language in a way that's expensive like our imaginations, and it demands time. None of us have time anymore for anything. We're all so busy and so distracted. So he demands your time, he demands you to sit down and engage with it, he demands you to say it out loud so you can hear the sounds and how the meaning comes through sound and sound comes through meaning, and everything is cyclical that way. So he is antithetical, radical, to the culture we're in right now. And that's the challenge, but that's also the strength. He demands your time. He demands you to go like, I don't know what he's saying, and to be okay with that. So I tell kids, you're going to be confused and lost. Just play with it. Don't feel personally attacked by a sense of feeling ignorant. It's okay not to follow every word. People love hip-hop music. I love hip-hop music too. I don't follow every word, but I get a sense of the rhythm. I get a sense of the blood. I get a sense of the physicality of it, of the sensuality of the body of it, and I enjoy it. It should be okay for kids not to know what the heck they're saying when they're reading these things and still enjoy it. And to put it through music, to put it through graphic novels, to put it through film and podcasts, and to feel like it's theirs, to take it apart and go into their basements and tell stories with found props and go like, this is Hamlet. And they should feel liberated to that. So for me, I try and go like, this is an invitation for you to be totally confused and perplexed. Find your way in. And it's okay if it takes years. I did Hamlet 10 years ago, and there's still days I wake up and go like, oh, goddamn, that's the line. That's how I should say that line. What was I saying as a noun? It's a verb. I still have that. So it's a lifelong, journey, and it should be, it's difficult, and that's okay. It's not, if it's difficult for you, it doesn't mean you don't get it. It's the thing itself is difficult.
Yeah. How about you, PJ?
Sorry, can you repeat the
question? Well, you said that you taught at a youth group?
So with Shakespeare in the Ruff, we have a youth program, and so we have applicants, young applicants between, I think, 16 to very early 20s that will apply to come and spend two times a week. They come out and hang out with us, and we bring in different mentors who are different artists. So that either are musicians or clown teachers or work in poetry or whatever. It can be just a wide range of design or directing or anything. And so yesterday we actually had gone to the art gallery and just to get a sense of other forms of creative impulse. And what does it look like? What does this painting or this particular multimedia piece, how does that impact you? Is there an emotional relationship that you might have with something that you are experiencing? And so part of the assignment is for them to riff off of that ultimately. And so in a way that, I think as writers of adaptations, what does that playing look like? And so with Shakespeare in the Ruff this summer, we're in Withrow Park, for those who may not know, in Toronto, and we are doing an adaptation of Makram Ayesh is doing an adaptation of The Tempest. And it's called A Witch in Algiers. And so the youth are riffing off of this particular piece and they have 2 nights that they get to perform their own creative work. And so I think on the, it's either the 24th and 25th or 25th and 26th, they're a yearly beloved part of the summer show experience. So it's a night or 2 nights where they get to just be celebrated and share what they have. Some of them are shy, and so it's not about the performance, the final performance. It's really about the process. And so we had a clown day the other day. We had a clown teacher come in, and it brought so much joy to experience. For anyone who loves a clown. There's so much freedom in just being present, and one of my favorite teachers of all time is Jan Henderson, who is an incredible clown teacher from University of Alberta. Although she studied with Pochenko in the 70s out here, I think. But there's something about having this full-heartedness as a way of exploration. And I was thinking about, someone had told me, I've never got to see it, and I really would love to find a version of it, or maybe just try it for fun, of a clown version of Romeo and Juliet. I don't know if anyone ever heard about this, but this apparently was done somewhere in London, England. And what I understood was that there were moments of pure ridiculousness. For example, the final scene, they couldn't decide on how to die, so they kept repeating it. So they'd be like, and they just have these moments of like pure clown, and just
Midsummer Night's Dream. That's bottom, right?
Like, or even Antony Cleopatra, right? When Antony watches his own death in this moment of like beauty, he's like, God, still not dead.
Oh my gosh!
Exactly. They're the moments of clown that are just like. Yeah.
And I'm sure Shakespeare was into that,
Yes.
Although he did fire his own clown, Will Kemp. And he did have that line in Hamlet, and let those who play your clowns speak no more than is set down for them. So I had strong opinions about that, but I think he a lot of those wonderful, and the clown is a skull in Hamlet, right? He's literally
dead,
like, I cut the clown. But it's
Twelfth Night. I don't know.
Strong opinions about clowns. Yeah.
Is there a clown in Twelfth Night?
There is Feste, but it's a different type of clown. The clown changes after he fires Kemp, right? He brings in a different type of actor.
Or the porter. Like the porter in Macker's too, right? It's like you have this amazing moment, and then this drunk comes up, and it's like, what are you doing, Shakespeare? Like, what are you saying? I love that. But that's cool. Like a clown adaptation of the most precious tragedy.
Yes. Imagine. I just think, the freedom of just playing it if everything goes wrong, how does that look? Just for fun.
Yeah.
And you could do that. You could do Hamlet in 5 minutes, I think.
Oh, you can.
As a clown, you could.
Everybody dies.
But not really.
Except for Horatio.
Oh, so I got a question here. We'll start with the simple one. Favorite play and why?
Oh, gosh. You go first. I don't know.
Of Shakespeare?
Yeah.
Of course.
Of course.
The man. My favorite Shakespeare play is The Winter's Tale. It's just an extraordinary statement of belief in magic and faith, and he plays with genre and style in that play freely. He switches between countries. He puts a coastline in Bohemia, which doesn't exist, which is amazing. He goes, yeah, sure, there's a beach there. He cares not. There's a bear that shows up and eats somebody. It's wonderful. And it has the most magical ending of the whole canon.
What happens?
I almost spoiled it for you. But if you haven't read or seen Shakespeare, although I have a feeling that if you wait one more season, you might see it here soon. But this is going to get cut from the podcast, isn't it? It's a wonderful play. It's a beautiful play. So it's because it stretches the genre that he was working in, and he goes for it. What about you?
I feel as though we haven't actually had you answer any questions. Do you have a favorite?
Oh, you want me to go first? Ooh, well, it's always the one that you're in. But in this case, I have loved Twelfth Night since high school. I had a really good high school teacher as well in Shakespeare, and she brought us here. And I saw Shauna McKenna on stage. I know, it's full circle. But yeah, there's something about Twelfth Night. It's a gem. It's an ensemble. It's a true ensemble piece. It's 3 different storylines that have each equal weight, and it just feels so collaborative. And it's Chekhovian. Like, we teach Chekhov sometimes together, and the bittersweet nature of it. Shakespeare was such a humanist, and he loved people so much, and there's such an empowerment of the other, and it's all in there. It's kind of like the comedy quintessential nature, in the same way as Hamlet, and they were written kind of at the same time. And I just love what it says about why we fall in love and what love means, and how to be present to now because we don't know what's to come. So yeah, it kind of embodies a lot of the biggest concepts of who he is and what he wrote. So I think that it's my favorite one right now, for sure. Or if not, I would have said The Winter's Tale as well. So yeah. How about you?
I feel as though I don't know enough, honestly. I don't know. I haven't seen enough.
But wait, you played Cleopatra. Can we talk about that? We didn't even talk about that.
That was terrifying. I will be honest, just because, I think you mentioned it, you can play these different princes and whatnot.
Yeah.
I didn't know how to play queen. I really didn't know how to play queen. But, it really does come down to the language. And I think eventually I found my stride. But yeah, it was a magical experience, Shakespeare in the Runes and all of that. There's text in that is so incredibly beautiful that after Antony has died, the monologues that I actually get weepy.
I know,
It's beautiful.
Yeah, like she just loved him so much. So she talks about like just this like sweeping like visualization of who he was. I think for me, I think the first one that I ever read and really just landed. I mean, I am drawn to the the tragedies, even though I love clown and I need to laugh. I need to find the laughs in things. Otherwise, it's just not going to go well for me. But the first one I ever read and just wept was King Lear. And I think that the heartbreak of that family dynamic, right? Of, this elder father he just wants his children to tell him how important he is. It just goes wrong from there, and there's so many avenues within it that, that are understandable in certain ways, and then others that are just, so massive. So I do love that piece. And I also, I did see it one time, I think Driftwood Theatre in Toronto was doing it. And I have to say that during the final, the death scene, the funeral scene, something was wrong that night. There were 3 different events that happened where there was a helicopter that went over at one point, and then there was the ice cream truck in Withrow Park. There's always an ice cream truck, and the sounds of the whatever the chiming is, and then within minutes of all of these things happening, there were about 4 young men who decided that they needed to see what was going on. And so with the 6-pack in hand and this open stage, one of them got on deck during the funeral scene and was like, "Wherefore art thou?" with this 6-pack. And they had to escort him off. And, we were like, "We're still with you. We're here." Like, just, there is something about these pieces that, the preciousness of these moments that, you can be watching the absurdity of somebody coming on stage and interrupting it, but also you're in a park, so you just go with it. You find a way to stay on track, and the story will take you there. So that was Lear, and
wow.
There's so many different plays that I think that we can find a way in.
It's phenomenal.
Your comment about how do I play a queen made me think of that Bergman quote: "The theater is an amazing place. An ordinary man walks on an ordinary space, sits in an ordinary chair, and says, 'I'm the king,' and everyone believes him." It's just the imagination, right? I'm the king. Okay, let's go. It's just, you just say I'm the queen of Egypt, right? It's like, yes, you are. Shakespeare says so. It's just a wonderful thing. True. Yeah.
Oh, theater.
What book would you recommend to start a love affair with Shakespeare?
Wow, great question.
Okay, I have 2. If you were talking like a biography of Shakespeare that sort of like kills any nonsense about conspiracy theories that he wasn't who he was, the Bill Bryson biography of him is really good. It's short, it's direct, it's to the point. It's very good. It's called William Shakespeare, The World is a Stage, I think. Bill Bryson. A book that is so moving and so touches on why we give ourselves to this thing. It's called Hamlet's Dresser. And it's about a boy who grew up in the city of Stratford, Connecticut, and became involved in the theater and became a dresser, loved the thing, and then became a teacher of Shakespeare for the elderly in New York. And he's still in his 82, I forget his name now, Hamlet's Dresser. It is just the most beautiful human account of why we're still wrestling with these things, and conducting workshops in old folks' homes, and why there's interest, and why the language, and why this, why now. It's so moving. Please read that. It will just really give you an account of how language can be a salvation that will make us feel less lonely.
Do you have one?
Well, actually, I was going to say, like, to me, it's the plays. I would just say open. It's akin to how I like to teach it. You have to read that stuff out loud. It was meant to be performed. It was meant to be heard. So much of the pleasure of it is in the sounds and the rhythm of it. So the love affair starts with the man himself, I think. Yeah. Pull out a soliloquy and read it to yourself. Read it out loud. Read it again. Watch the shows, the sonnets. Start with the sonnets. Oh my God. Rodrigo and I were lucky enough that we're in the final year of Martha Henry's conservatory, and we were lucky to be flown to Scotland to work with Kristen Linklater, who's a famous voice coach. She's written a bunch of books on performing Shakespeare, and she's since passed. But she worked with us through sonnets mostly, because there's no character. There's nowhere to hide. It's just you. And suddenly all of these walls that we put up as actors, I'm playing a character, I don't have to worry, they're gone. Like, you have to tear it apart, and it just becomes this kind of open wound of truth. And that's where I think he works from. That's where I think his empathy comes from, of like, these people are really just people, sometimes behaving badly. But yeah, it would be through the words themselves.
Wow. Thank you. It's a tricky question, and I feel like I almost have to have my books with me in order to really name the one that I feel like I'm forgetting. The one that's popped into my head right now is an adaptation, Janet Sears' Harlem Duet, also Othello, but it is a really spectacular read. Yeah,
that's good. Adaptations of his plays are a good way in, because it liberates them from going like, this is canonical.
Yeah, for sure.
That's a very good way.
Well, I mean, when we were in Sault Ste. Marie, it was like, do you know Hamlet? Oh, do you know Shakespeare? No. Oh, do you know Hamlet? No. So The Lion King.
It's the way in.
Romeo and Juliet. Have you heard of that? Okay, great. Like, whatever in there is, I think is valid. Speaking of which, in the States, we use No Fear Shakespeare as a series of modern English translations of Shakespeare's plays to introduce Shakespeare to middle school students, ages 11 to 14. Do you see these translations as adapted through a cultural lens or a mere watering down of Shakespeare?
Great question.
Mm.
I always really appreciate the no fear. That's the question, right? No fear. Yeah, because sometimes I'm just not. I need to have some sort of sounding board or a visual or something that will say, oh, this is actually what it means here, because I might not know the original connotation of the phrasing. So I do enjoy the when I have looked at them in the past, they seem to be helpful. I don't really think of it as watering down so much as just finding another way in, possibly. And then in the playing of it, so that you just, it'll impact you in a different way when you are saying the text, the actual original text.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think it's a really helpful tool. I do like to wait until I go to it, because I remember we were teaching a workshop. For opera students in Shakespeare, and we were spending a long time around a circle going, what does this mean with this line? And then we paused for a second. We said, do you see this, guys? Do you see this? This is the value of teaching Shakespeare in school, is that all of us together are trying to find what this means through different ways in. Everybody was offering, I think it means this. No, I think it actually means this. I think it's related to that line from the previous scene. So in this conversation, we're trying to together demystify it and answer the complexity of the language of the line in the language. So I think that's the value of teaching Shakespeare. It's that you wrestle with it together in a room, and everybody has a voice and an opinion and a way in. Because some of his lines, the thing about Shakespeare is that everything he says means more than one thing. He says one thing, but he means something else, and there's often a dick joke thrown in there as well. Like he's just so high and so low, right? He goes divine bass, like this. And then you go like, well, what does this really mean? Oh, it means everything. Can you play everything? So the no fear is good because then you go, okay, this is the sort of like, yeah, it's a clarification of it. The only thing I have not against it, but that I warn about it is that don't see that as the set meaning of it. See that as a clear sort of translation of it that can help you find a meaning through the line that you have to, then perform or say or teach. But know that there are multiple ways around that too. It's not set in stone. So yeah, I wouldn't take it as gospel, but certainly a useful tool as you try and wrestle with the meaning.
Yeah. Oh, it's so fascinating watching students approach this stuff, and like, I don't think I know what it means. You're like, well, no, but what does it feel like it means?
Yeah.
And often they're right. They're right because it's in the gutter. So I love them too, because it's that dance of, okay, so this is what I'm actually saying, and then look how he's saying it, right? Like, look at the poetry of how he's saying it. Look at how, oh, he loves her, but he expands it to mean her eyes are like the stars, and it's as if, right? Like,
exactly.
Live in the metaphor of it. Like, so much of what we do as actors is to, okay, really live in the image of it, but giving that experience. We just did this play in Winnipeg called Iago Speaks. It's a sequel to Othello. It picks up with Iago in prison, and the jailer is there, and he tries to get Iago to speak, because Iago famously says, "I will never speak word again." And he's ushered out at the end of Othello. And then he picks up with the action after that in this play. But in the play, Iago, then when he finally speaks, spoiler, he does speak, he speaks in a sort of like pseudo-Shakespearean language. And the jailer is like, why you talk like that? You take 18 words to say 3. And it's like, well, it wasn't my intention to talk like that. Well, then what's your intention? Yes or no? Yes or no? He pushes Iago, but Iago says, it's the speaking is not in the words I'm saying is not in the speaking, it's in the thinking. If you have to emulate my speaking, emulate my thought. If I speak this way, it's because I think this way. So these characters think a particular way. So if you are trying to find a way of why am I saying this, you have to go into the character's thinking mode. And every character thinks differently and therefore speaks differently, because the speaking is the reflection of the way they think. Caliban speaks very different from Prospero. It's still Shakespeare's hand, but why does he speak differently? The witches speak very differently in rhythm and form and content than from the royals in Macker's. The thinking is different. It's in the thinking. The problem with the no fear is that it gives you a sort of like flat, same thinking for every character, and then you lose the nuance of how they think. Cleopatra thinks differently from Antony. I love the line she says when she talks to her girlfriends. The way that she goes like, these Romans, like, he words me, girls. He words me. He's using language as a politician. He's wording me. He uses a noun as a verb. And that because she thinks that way, and she thinks differently than Antony. So that's the thing. You have to look into the character's thinking. It reflects their speaking. Yeah.
It also reminds me, I think I saw ballet when I was around 21, Romeo and Juliet, and I still remember Romeo when he first sees Juliet and the visual of him, I was way up at the top in the back, but his like, he was like, this young boy who has just like apparently definitely had his heart like ripped out, right? Or he's like, who is this girl, right? And there was such a visual of just the physicality, of telling a story too. It's like, yes, the text, absolutely, but also the physicality is like, it allows you to run the gamut of these emotions. It allows you to feel them as you're speaking them, so that you're processing and you're really going through it, which I think is why it's so wordy. But it's like, it is the beauty of the poetry and the hilariousness too, or the moments,
the slipperiness of it. It's so slippery. They're trying to find it's living thought, right? And for me, the thing that ties to that, it's a fascinating question, so it opens up all kinds of things. I had this mentor who said, and this only came up 4 or 5 years ago, that changed everything for me. This is complex language for the actor and the character. It's sometimes we pretend that the character just speaks like this and that's it. It's complex for the character. The character themselves are trying to find that metaphor. He words me, girls. He words me. I found it. I found the metaphor. The characters are going, I don't know, a quintessence of dust. Found it. They're finding it in the moment. It's complex and difficult for them because the risk you run in pretending this is normal language is that you get those fatally fluent BBC from the 70s. Everything's beautifully spoken. And you end up with what this mentor used to call it fatally fluent. It's competent, it's beautiful, it's poetic, it's crisp, but you don't get any of it. You go, what are they saying? Sounds what? So there needs to be a sense of the character themselves are going, what? What am I saying? Found the metaphor. That's it. I think I meant that. It's slippery, right? So that liberated for me to try and pretend that it was, the character just talks like this. No, they're trying to find that it's complex for them as well.
Mm-hmm. I'll try to combine these two in a way. Speak of how translations and different approaches may change the emphasis and emotions. And I'll combine it with this one. Like, how would you translate, I'm not going to say this phrase because it's from Mackers, but how could you translate phrases that are richly poetic?
I want to know the phrases now.
Or specifically, also, I'm wondering, and I think we've had talks about this, like, it's in iambic for a reason, and there's so much information textually when we're approaching it as actors that give us insight into the character's psychology. Long line endings, short line endings, feminine, caesuras right down the center. When you're translating it into something else, especially considering you've had the opportunity to sit next to a translator, and that we both come from Latin languages too. French can't write in iambic. The language just doesn't work that way. The last word is always the strong. You're always going towards the end. Can you speak to that, or is there a rhythm?
There's certainly a rhythm, certainly a sense of rhythm. Absolutely, every language has its own rhythms, right? And in Shakespeare, rhythm is meaning, and meaning is rhythm. You have the form and the content are always dancing with themselves. So there's certainly an awareness of rhythm. There's certainly an awareness of a poetic form, i.e. a heightened language, a way to express things metaphorically with big vision, as opposed to an everyday common observation. So there's certainly a care for a preservation of a sense of rhythm, but there's no preoccupation in trying to match the beat of the English language. You cannot. Portuguese translations of Molière are very close to the French translations because he operates in Alexandrian lines, 11, 12, 13 syllables. And in Shakespeare it's shorter, you have 9 and 10 beats. So it's just shorter. It takes more words in Latin languages to say what you're trying to say than in English language. In English is very in tune with the sound of something is the thing itself. Bang, crack, boom. These are words that describe what they are and actually sound like what they are. English is very much sonically in tune with that, not so much in Latin languages. But a lot of the stuff that Shakespeare was working with, he was borrowing and stealing from Latin and making it Anglo, like words like assassination, torture, all these things are from Latin, and he was making them, anglicizing them, transporting them, adapting them. So there's a DNA that connects there from Latin to an Anglo-Saxon language. But there's not that sort of like, I'm gonna set this to 10 beats and this is monosyllabic in English, therefore it must be monosyllabic in Portuguese. It's just, you can't hold like that. But through that exploration itself, what you do is that you really explore all the things Shakespeare was working with. You do go like, oh, look at this, He's working with monosyllabic words. He's working with consonants and vowels here and mostly vowels there. As a long line, you're asking yourselves the question, and you try and use that in the translation. You try to retain the intention, even though the rhythm might be different. So it's still preserved, it's just transformed. Yeah. Ser ou não ser eis a questão. You know what I said. All right? It's just ser ou não ser. Eis a questão.
Être ou ne pas être. Là est la question.
The rhythm kind of is there.
Yeah.
Right, there you go. Yeah.
Well, speaking of which, this is for me. I'm of French-Canadian descent. I see no interest in Shakespeare in my relatives, even for those who live in Montreal and participate in the arts. It's interesting because I was just reading on how actually in Germany, Shakespeare, they've appropriated it. It's theirs. They don't even really consider, it's true. We're getting it through English translation. It's just part of their curriculum. It's their mandate. It belongs to them. And France doesn't really have that. Quebec doesn't really have that. I guess they just decided they had Molière and it was what it is.
It was enough.
We have our guy, it's fine. They're very different. But yeah, that's true. Every now and then you have a Shakespeare translation and it's always interesting because I find even French acting is different. Just from my background, my mom's family's French, so I went to a lot of French theater and I always felt it was more physical, it was more big, it was more... I do see a lot of similarities to Shakespeare. Maybe that's why I'm here. But it is strange that culturally they haven't really grasped him for their own,
In Quebec?
Yeah.
Mostly? Yeah.
But
Lepage is really into Shakespeare.
Lepage is really into Shakespeare. Dun, dun, dun.
In different languages.
Yeah.
Too.
All right. Wait, there was something else. Rodrigo said Shakespeare wasn't precious about his plays. How do we know he wasn't outraged by all the reproductions?
In his time or since in his time?
Or now? Or
But he probably was on some level, but he wasn't writing for publication. The plays didn't belong to him. It belonged to the playhouse. He didn't hold the rights to his own plays. It was so difficult for his friends 7 years after his death to gather all the plays. Some plays arrived late in the process to be included in the folio. I love the story that Troilus and Cressida came so late that it's not featured in the index. So they just stuck that play in the folio later on. It's such a messy, wonderful collection of works, the folio. He probably was on some level, but he also was able, I think, to let it go. He was in a company of like 12, 13 actors. There's no way they didn't have opinions. There's no way he didn't cater to some of them, particularly Burbage. There's just no way that he wasn't open to things not going entirely his way. I mean, otherwise he wouldn't have done anything. And if you look at his plays, if you look at Henry VI, what he starts with, which is a very messy play that now is commonly attributed to both him and Marlowe, and you look at the final plays, Tempest and To Noble Kinsman, there's such a progression, such a transformation of style and competency and invention and different interests and he just evolves so much as a player. You look at the page, just look at it when you get home today. Look at the speeches in Titus Andronicus, his first tragedy, and look at the speeches in Winter's Tale. You will see big blocks of texts on the page, people talking at each other. Blah, 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 my line, blah, 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 blah. And you look at Winter's Tale, there's shared lines, short lines, missing beats, prose, verse, switching, a song comes in. He's just not precious the work is not precious. So it makes me think that he was okay with going, yeah, sure, there are many versions of R&J out and about town. Some of these there were so many theories of actors that were fired or and then they went to a publishing house and then set the play down from memory to get back to the playhouse, and then they would publish that version. If you look at the first quarter of Hamlet, it's just so different. That famous line is, to be or not to be, aye, there's the point, is the line in the first quarter of Hamlet. Aye, there's the point. And you look at the speech, it sounds like somebody set it down from memory. It's there, but it's not quite the thing. And it exists and was published, So I just think he didn't care. He wasn't precious. He sort of was a practical man of the theater, really in tune with what sold, what didn't sell, really in tune with the marketing and the business sides of it. He didn't have time. He didn't have time to go well, that's not really the real version of R&J going out there. I think he was a practical man working with actors.
That's so lovely. So we're at time. I just wanted to read this because I think this is a kind of perfect question that doesn't really have an answer. So, can Shakespeare be about global futures as well as part of our contemporary world? I want to say yes. I am hopeful about it. And it speaks to what a humanist he was and how these plays really are for everybody. And there's always something you can find across generations, across countries, across life experiences, age, like everything.
His characters had the same disease, a great imagination. All of them. All of them go, I can be the king. I deserve to be the king. I want to be the queen. How can I get there? And that's primal, right?
I'm going to add something that's a little bit, I'm away from my microphone. When I completed Antony and Cleopatra, the final showing at Shakespeare in the Ruins, there was a massive storm that was coming in, and we could all see it. It was coming in from the corner. We were performing about right here, but we could also see there was another angle where basically we were surrounded by prairie storm, which, anyone who has ever not seen it, I really recommend going to the prairies just to witness something like that.
It's so stressful when doing a show.
It was amazing. It was amazing. And I never in my life have ever had this kind of experience, because you're on the ground. You're right by the river, all of these things, And as it was coming in, I kept looking at the storm going, that storm is going to be here in 10 minutes and we still have 20 minutes of text. And because as a prairie child, I'm from Saskatchewan, I know when that's coming in. In that particular play, the 3 Indigenous women playing the roles of the Egyptians did not die. So I was screaming into the wind. There were the diehards in their blue little raincoats. I couldn't believe it. All of them were just like hunkered down, stormed so loud and just full on within that 10 minutes. And I was trying to scream the text. I couldn't hear myself. And they were just sitting there just waiting for it. And the stage manager had to call it. But the hopefulness of that play ending where the 3 Indigenous women did not have to commit suicide. I was like, yes! Bye! See you later.
They survived.
That was the end for that show for me. And I was like, great. Thanks, guys.
That's it.
Yep.
That's it. Yeah.
And so I guess in that way, I'm like, yes, we can change the outcome, or it'll just be changed for us in some alchemy way, I think, on some level.
Absolutely. He called his theory the globe, right? And I love the line in Henry V, like, can this cockpit hold the vasty fields of France? And I think that's the gesture, right? Can these plays resonate across the globe? Can we tell stories from different cultures, different languages through this tag? And I think we can. I think we've proven for 1st century that we can.
It dials down, it distills down to, can you see yourself in another person? That's all this is to me, right? So, yeah. What brings it right back to the most personal becomes the most universal. Thank you so much for coming.
Yeah.
Let's applaud these.
Thank you all very much for coming. Thank you to our panel. Enjoy the rest of your Friday. This event was recorded as part of the Meighen Forum in front of a live audience in Lazaretus Hall at the Tom Patterson Theatre in Stratford, Ontario, Canada. Be sure to subscribe to keep up with the lively conversations and original performances housed by the Stratford Festival's streaming service, Stratfest at Home. And for making it this far in the episode, we're going to give you a gift. Enjoy 1 month free on Stratfest at Home with promo code FREEMONTH. Visit stratfestathome.ca and enter code FREEMONTH to enjoy 1 month of free streaming content. It takes you, our listeners, to make this possible. It also takes the support of our dear collaborator. Support for the Meighen Forum is generously provided by Kelly and Michael Meighen and the T.R. Meighen Family Foundation. Original score for the Everyday Forum podcast was provided by Hilary Adams. Production support is provided by the film production and distribution team at the Stratford Festival. That is manager Yash Chabria, film editor Chris von Kleist, and director Jenna Dixon. The Meighen Forum team is producing assistants Renata Hansen and James Hyatt, coordinator Mira Henderson, manager Gregory McLaughlin, and director Julie Miles. Special thanks to Michael Adams, Jennifer Lee, Greg Doherty, Harper Charlton, and Kendallin Bishop. Finally, thanks to artistic director Anthony Cimolino and executive director Anita Gaffney. From here in Stratford, Ontario, on the land of the Neutrals and the Anishinaabe, see you next time. Ba Ma Pi.